Hey everyone, my name is Francisco Escobar, and I'm the host and creator of this show, Conversamos. This is a special episode as we are airing a Season 3 early exclusive. Stay tuned as we discuss about Indigenous Peoples Day, Columbus Day, and Día de La Raza. All here as Latin Entertainment presents Conversamos.
Is it that wrong? I'm making a song, I'm taking it back for the platform that I formed. Music's helping me transform. I run the reservoir, the predator, like a hungry carnivore. When I'm breaking through these heavy doors, this is Desert Storm. A metaphor to show I'm equipped and informed. I'm striking with the mega force.
Before we announce our panel, let's spotlight a nonprofit and their upcoming fundraising initiative, the Mixteco Indígena Community Organizing Project, MICOP. Unites Indigenous leaders and allies to strengthen the Mixtec and Indigenous immigrant community in Ventura County in California. MICOP Majority's Indigenous staff builds community leadership and self-sufficiency through education and training programs, language interpretation, health outreach, humanitarian support, and cultural promotion. And on Thursday, October 29th, 2020, they are going to have their major annual fundraising event online, Night in Oaxaca 2020. Check it out virtually. Now, let me introduce you to our panel. We have Dalila Mendez and Veronica Suactitl Balades. Thank you both for joining us. And now with our first question, how would you describe Indigenous Peoples Day, Columbus Day, and Día de la Raza?
When we think about them, right, as a collective, in a way, they're so interconnected, like the histories of them all, like in their experience in different parts of our world. When we're thinking of like our global community, so historically, Columbus Day has been celebrated in the Americas when we think of like the United States, Canada. As a day that some people believe that, he discovered the state, the United States of America, but we know that he actually encountered it, right? Indigenous Peoples Day honors this, right? So in some forms, some places in the United States, like I show my students like different places that these different holidays are celebrated. So some people celebrate and want to honor the Indigenous people or the First People, as the Canadians might refer to the Native Americans, or the Indigenous people. They're honoring what they did. And I know Día de la Raza, I know that is more celebrated in the Latin American countries, but it's also celebrated in España. And it was made, like, I know that there was it's kind of like this Día de la Raza is this day that was also an uprising, to protest what España was celebrating, which was Columbus Day, which is why I was saying that they're all interconnected. And even though the question is to separate them, it's just like at the end of the day, they're so related and you have to unpack them together. So I hope that makes sense.
So building on what Sister Dalila was sharing, I think that we also, it started with the celebration of Columbus Day, and as people continue to build in consciousness at larger collective numbers and came to understand that we really shouldn't be celebrating Columbus Day for several reasons. One is that he didn't discover, he came and, it was more of an intrusion, right, on the land where many Indigenous people already resided and built civilizations, had societies, had governments, had cultures, had et cetera, et cetera. And so it was more of an invasion. And so when more and more people came to understand what came with that as far as genocide and rape and the destruction of many cultures and the killing of 10 to 12 million Indigenous lives, then we understood that we shouldn't really be celebrating it. It's not a happy occasion. And also Columbus He was lost. We all know that now. He was lost. He thought this was India. That's why people call indigenous people or Native Americans or First Peoples Indians, and that's a misnomer because Columbus thought he was in India. And so there were all of these mistakes that actually got him to be famous for something that he really didn't do. And so this is something that we really see often in our curriculum that is really centered on Eurocentric perspectives, right, and narratives, and that they create these romanticized stories of discoverers and explorers and heroes and etc. to elevate themselves, right, and create an hierarchy of supremacy. And so now that we understand that, the pushback to that, the resistance, the resistencia to that, is to create opposing holidays like Día de La Raza and Indigenous Peoples Day, where we now shift the focus from somebody who committed a lot of atrocities back to the fact that because we have resisted for so many generations, and our ancestors were able to, even though many lost their lives, those who were left were able to maintain what they could and pass on through the generations. And so because we were supposed to be extinct as a whole peoples of indigenous nations, we're still here. We're here recording this video, claiming our indigeneity, and that is something to celebrate, because what we're really discovering, the big discovery to celebrate, is that we discovered the indigeneity that we hold within ourselves. And that is what we're celebrating when we have Día de la Raza and Indigenous Peoples Day.
So Día de la Raza is something that's celebrated in Latin America. And this concept of La Raza is something I didn't grow up with. It's something that kind of does confuse me, because I have heard it means like the people, mi gente. But in Latin America, there is this racial disparity between those who are white Latin Americans and those who are Afro-Latinos and those who are indigenous peoples. So it is a really, La Raza is a really, we all coming together in this kumbaya moment. And so, and the also thing to bring up about like expanding our consciousness with that is that years later, more so currently, more so in Central America, but also across Latin America, there is the Día de la Resistencia Indígena. So kind of just, which is again reclaiming one's indigeneity on this specific day intentionally, because Columbus story is not just for, as some people advocate, for Italian immigrants. It can also be for Hispanic and Hispanidad. And so that's like to add to that. So can you just someone like elaborate what it really La Raza really is, and how does that play in this context of like a racial hierarchy, if there even is one?
I think that it's really difficult to be able to say, well, this is what raza really means, because so many people have different definitions for that, just like you expressed, right? There's so many different definitions. And so I think it's hard to pinpoint what that is. My understanding of it was always like the people, but there is this racial and hierarchy of color even amongst what we call Latinx people, right? I don't necessarily like that name because we're focusing on our European traits rather than our indigeneity, which I think that's why people came up. Part of the reason why they came up with the word La Raza is to steer away from European terms like Latinx or Hispanic, right? It's to steer away from that in some ways, to say we're the people, right? We're self-determining, and we're going to be able to self-identify instead of having these other Eurocentric labels imposed on us. And so that was my understanding of La Raza. But it is very complicated because we come with this very complicated history of mestizaje, right? Of all this, we're so mixed as, Latinx people, right? And I'm using that term because not everybody here, like I'm the only Chicana here, and you all have your own identities. But do we go with that identity of like, somos todos Latinos, or are we all raza? Or are we all indigenous, right? So we have all these different variations, and I think that comes with different levels of consciousness and conocimiento, like understanding of the history. And so I think it's a gradual process for a lot of people, right? Like what is it that they're going to identify with the most? And when they have a good understanding of what that is, and then are exposed to other terms and other identities and start to move in that direction. And some people do that and some people don't. Some people are stuck on a term or on a label, and they won't let it go no matter what, but I'm very open to, exploring what all of these titles and labels mean? What impact do they have? What are the implications of all of these labels for us? And how does that affect our movements and the collective consciousness of our people?
When we're thinking about this word La Raza, and we're thinking about language, right? Language is alive and language is continuous, and it's just so transformative, right? Even the Spanish that we speak. And when we think of our identities and these intersectionalities, yo soy Boricua, I'm Puerto Rican, and but then again, I'm really New Yorican, right? Yo soy de Brooklyn, like I'm from Brooklyn, mommy's from, so and then I live in this this transnational like bridge, and I'm stuck porque like when I'm in La Isla, I'm not Boricua enough, right? But then when I'm in the States, depending on what region in the States, and then because my father is a mixed, Afro-Latino man, so a Black man in some states, all these different layers, or we're mixed, we're the tres, like we're of three races, we say in Puerto Rico. You see it everywhere, the murals, and this constant reminder that you're of three races, and then the media that exposes more like the white Latinidad, or the like showing the passing Latinidad as the level of where you're supposed to be for some reason, and making those on the island, the Afro-Black Latinos, I'm speaking more like of PR, but all throughout Latin America, they're invisible, right? Just because I'm just thinking of like Hurricane Maria and just everything that has happened. And when I think of La Raza, right, I'm thinking it's where La Raza is in a mix, because I grew up in the States, so I didn't really celebrate Dia de la Raza. And when I learned about it, and when I understood that there was so many different meanings of it, I said, okay, for my meeting, I'm going to say it will be to celebrate all three races, right? Because this is what our identity makes us now, and we are resistant, So La Raza is also can be action, and siempre pa'lante, us moving forward as like being together. Even I'm Boricua, or someone may stick to that label, Puerto Rican, not Boricua, and that's okay, because like it is a moment to be together collectively and get more conocimiento, and the language continues to change, and maybe people see their identity differently.
It's kind of going off of what everyone's saying, even analyzing Columbus Day, or who Columbus was, right? In the context of people advocating for it as an Italian immigrant holiday. Just some things I like to point out is that Italy wasn't formed during those times. Spain financed his voyages. He reached Puerto Rico, like you said earlier, he didn't even come to the United States. He reached Puerto Rico and the islands, and then that spread more across Latin America. So with that said, why is Columbus Day not celebrated as a mainstream Hispanic holiday in the United States? Because I think there's more relevance to Hispanics, and I say that like intentionally as a term, than say Italian Americans, when there's, I think, more connection there.
The only thing I can think of is just because it's the history has been told incorrectly for so long that not a lot of people knew or even know now that he never even stepped foot on what is today the United States, right? So in general, our K through 12 education had us believing that he discovered what we know of today to be the United States. And so that stuck with us. That really, really stuck with us. And so that's the only thing that I can really think of. I can't speak, it might be different, in Puerto Rico and on the islands, so I'll let Dalila speak to that. But as far as like my experience on the West Coast as a Chicana, we were never taught that until much later. As an adult, I understood that he, didn't step foot on the United States, and that he just, it was on the islands first. And so that's why I felt like it was never a Hispanic holiday, right? Because it didn't affect us, when in reality it did. But that goes to speak to like the power of education. And if there's this lie that is told over and over and over again, it becomes truth. And when you unveil the fact that it isn't true, we have people that embrace the new truth that it's like, yeah, okay, that makes sense, right? And then we have people that fight tooth and nail against this reality of what really happened during that time, and they just don't want to accept it because it's been told part of our education system for so long. And so really this speaks to looking at our education system through a critical lens and making sure that all voices are being represented during these major historical moments. And then there's so many other historical moments that are not even included in history books because, you know, they were led by people of color. And so those are completely excluded. So there's a lot of work that we have to do in the education system because we have been really miseducated, and we have to unlearn a lot of things so that we can learn the truth.
Yeah, I agree completely, Veronica, because I think, you know, when I think about in the United States, what's the culture and the language of power, right? It's the English narrative. It's the Eurocentric narrative, right? And when you think about just schooling in general and what the history of schooling is, it was to assimilate us, right? And just the coined term Hispanic, right? Like, you know, as a Latinx or Hispanic or South American, Central American, Caribbean descendant, diaspora, part of this diaspora, however we will assume to identify, right? A lot of what we are told is from this Eurocentric lens that we don't even understand the layers to our own identities. So it's not I think it wasn't celebrated that much in Hispanic, like in our households, because it just wasn't something that our parents were talking about, or it wasn't shared, or if it was the Eurocentric idea of it, and it was because our parents wanted assimilation, right? So like, I'm 1.5 generation, right? My mom wasn't born here, but my dad was. So like, sometimes just the ideas I would hear about just, you know, my mom was just like, oh, you have to know English more so. And my dad was like, oh, you know, like just, so I'm just thinking about like our parents, and then my parents were always working. So maybe that's why they didn't think about this holiday either, right? So it's just, there's so many layers to why it's not considered a Hispanic holiday, because we didn't embrace it. And if we do, how are we embracing it?
I really like how you both brought up assimilation into this. And so I just want to know, like, what have been the effects of assimilation from, like, I guess from your parents, our parents' generations to even today, and how we see moving on to the future?
Assimilation, it's really complex because I am Boricua, and just as a bilingual educator and thinking of like just the scope of the history of bilingual education in the States, from Cali to New York, you know, this is super connected because we had to fight for our human language rights, right? To be educated and not be treated like mental patients. So in those moments, I know the Puerto Rican community fought really hard with the Aspira decree and the Lau versus Nichols happening in Cali, which also had like Aspira lawmakers from New York that we were working together, thanks to Brown versus Board, everything, civil rights movement. We were making these changes in this, you know, by the time of the 70s, 74 and the 80s, we have we're fighting for our right to learn in our language and to learn English as well. And then when people think of Puerto Ricans, people think Puerto Ricans don't speak Spanish anymore. They're like, oh yeah, you guys don't know Spanish because we've been here for so long. Or the many Mexican Americans who did assimilate, and then the Mexican Repatriation Act, because, you know, they had this Repatriation Act that happened and sent so many Mexican Americans back to Mexico that didn't even know English because they assimilated, right? So there's so many, from the Great Depression until now, right? Since we've always been here, the Latinos, as however we identify, we've been here, our ancestors have been here, and we try to fit in, then we don't, then we fight against it. So I feel like it's a tug of war. The tug of war, we don't know. My parents were like English. My dad was chill about it, and then he was like, no, English. He would change I went like that because he would change his mind, how he felt about it. And then my mom she valued her Spanish. She still watched her novelas. She still did these things, but she would still say certain things like, you have to do it like the white people. Some, like there was just certain things she understood. Like, I want you, we're going to go live in this neighborhood because I need you to go to this good school, but we're going to worship in this neighborhood because these are our people and this is our community. So it's like our parents try to assimilate because they know that they want the best for us, but then they lose a lot of who they are and they try to seek it elsewhere. And it's just like, it's really hard. It's just so many years of us it's a tug of war. In the island, PR, we still speak Spanish, but they forced English and then we fought for Spanish. And so it's like, we're still, I don't know, like we're trying to assimilate, but we have to, once we get that marco nacimiento, we have to resist and accept our, our mix, because we're mixed. We're here too.
Definitely. So there's a difference between assimilation and acculturation, right? So the acculturation assimilation is when you really just kind of leave behind your mother culture, your mother language, and you immerse yourself into this new culture and language. And acculturation is when you hold on to your mother culture and language, and then you bring on the new culture and language, but without ever having to give up your original culture. So that's acculturation. And I think that for those of us that come from immigrant families, however many generations that is, and are living in the United States, then we have to learn how to navigate both of those cultures. And so that's where we acculturate, right? And it is very true that depending on where we're at, if I were to go to Mexico, they're my cousins, my primas out there, they're not going to see me as Mexicana, like soy Americana, And so I'm always arguing with them, but no, I'm soy Mexicana, And they're like, no, eres Americana. And I'm just like, ugh. And so that's hard for me to swallow because there's now like my own family, my own blood, they see me as other than them. And then here in the United States, well, we all understand that it doesn't like, unless we go and dye our hair and wear blue contacts and have no accent whatsoever and change our name to a very Americanized name, even then they may not even see us American enough. You know what I mean? So we're always having to deal with that. But to the question of assimilation, it has been very detrimental. And I don't know if you all know right now, but the government has a program in place for all the kids that were in ICE detention centers and cages, kids in cages. So now they're putting together a program and grant money so that families can foster these kids to get them out of the ICE camps, but they're calling it an assimilationist program. So this is something that's funded by the federal government that is still happening today. The same thing that happened hundreds of years ago with indigenous children that were taken from their families, from their parents, and then put into boarding schools, right? And cut their hair off, made them change their name from an indigenous name to an English name, and forced them to speak English only and learn through a Eurocentric model. And so that's happening right now to these immigrant children that were in ICE camps, okay, taken away from their parents. So I can just imagine all the possible wrong things that could happen under this program. And so, my prayers go out, and we have to think of ways to deal with that, and through activism. But and just to share, like my parents were immigrants. My mom to this day is a monolingual Spanish speaking Mexicana, and she's proud of it. And so because of that, I learned my mother language. She understood the importance of all of us, my siblings and I, having to navigate the education system and trying to do well through that. But she never told us to she was never explicit in telling us to Americanize ourselves as much as possible. Those conversations never took place. My partner, on the other hand, his grandparents went through, they were already here. They were born in the United States. And so when they were going through school, it was like they were really pushing hard assimilation, and they wouldn't let them speak Spanish in schools. They were punished and physically punished for speaking Spanish. And so they beat the Spanish out of them, essentially. And so by the time they had their children, and then their children had their children, they were like, don't speak Spanish, speak English, because they were traumatized from that experience, right? And so my partner grew up not knowing any Spanish whatsoever. So it wasn't until he became a monastic dancer himself, being exposed to so many Spanish speakers, where he picked up the language. So he did that later as an adult, but it was because it was beat out of his grandparents, they didn't pass that language on. So it's very detrimental, because now we have this gap between, you know, our first generation or second generation and the grandparents, who can no longer communicate with each other. And that is the saddest thing to me, right? Where like los nietos can't communicate with abuelita about anything. And so there's no conversation, there's no connection, and that's really sad.
Well, from the African American community in general, the Black community, it's just the layers of oppression is just like with the history of slavery, and that's like a whole nother narrative that's can coexist with the Native American experience, because with the genocide, many African Americans and Native Americans did work together, and there are many of them are mixed. But the thing is, I feel like African Americans can't like if you can my dad is a Black man. I'm not a Black woman. I'm a brown woman, even though that's my heritage. Like, but I feel very comfortable like speaking African American English with my family, with my community. So as I say this, I do want to affirm as this community, and like I feel like you can speak like this and you can create your own, but sometimes white supremacy will let that down. And there's Black entrepreneurs, people like who will always speak African American English no matter what. Like, Steve Harvey says, I ain't gonna talk to like these white folks differently. Like, I'm gonna talk the same exact way, the way I always speak, and I ain't gonna change it. And this is how I'm gonna make my show. And that's who he is, right? Like, so it's just like very complex. I feel like you can't not everyone can do what Steve Harvey did too. I feel like in the Black community. So, and then in the Latino community too, it's just like if we're thinking about our families who are sending their kids to the United States and they're ending up in cages, they're trusting that someone's going to help them and then no one's going to help them. It's just like, some people are not going to want to acculturate. Some people are going to want to resist. So I think it's like, how do we build comunidad? How do we build horizontal leadership? How do we get back to our indigenous? How do we teach our indigenous ways? How do we educate our community para tener like esa conocimiento, para like to have true sustenance, and we have co-ops, right? Like you talked about Williamsburg, that's a huge gentrified neighborhood, right? Like I'm thinking about all parks. Like my family, some of it is from Sunset Park, Park Slope, when Park Slope was the hood, and now you have food co-ops for the gentrifiers. So then there's this once brown community, like Park Slope was very brown, Black like community, gentrified. They're doing this. It's just like, I feel like everything, all these natural ways and these like our indigenous ways are becoming. You're seeing them more in white spaces, and then you have food deserts all throughout New York City. Like like my family's I also have family from East New York. Like that's huge food deserts. And billionaires in New York City and people starving in New York City. I don't get it, right? So it's like, acculturate to what? What am I acculturating to? Mm-hmm. How am I going to be seen? Am I going to be assumed that I'm a citizen, or am I going to be killed because I have Black skin if I'm a Black person? So it's like, what am I acculturating to is how I feel like I'm thinking, how am I going to survive and learn how to help each other, and in the most diplomatic ways like our ancestors did. And I need to learn too, because I don't know. I don't know everything, and I want to learn, and we all have to be very honest about that, right? So,
when I was in Chile, I think 3 years ago, I was like on a EFL like teaching practice, and I saw like Simón Bolívar, José de San Martín, Bernardo Higgins. These are like Latin American liberators. Their statue, I took a photo with them and everything. The following week, I see all their faces painted white and like completely disrespecting in this regard. I asked one of the locals, like, why did people paint on them? Like, what is this about? He pretty much said they're not all liberators. And that opened my eyes a lot of like what Latin American history is and what this liberation movement is. Because sure, indigenous peoples fought on Bolivar's side same as the Africans fought on part of Jose de San Martin's. Were they ever generals or in those higher up positions? I'm not too sure, but that's something that I would like to question. But also, after the liberation movement, the language remained the same, Spanish. The religion remained the same, and Catholicism continues to spread. And although slavery may have ended 5 or 10 years post being independent in these countries, there is still systematic oppression for Africans and indigenous people. To the question that I'd like for you, Veronica, to really ask, and to add on as well, what are your thoughts in Columbus and the Central Latin American figure statues being teared down and painted on?
Well, I think the way that I feel about that is that because people are coming to that consciousness right now, and they're just really fed up with the systemic oppression and all symbols that are representations of that systemic oppression. That's part of this movement right now of like, we're just tired of it. The social contract has been broken because the laws and the morals that would uphold people in positions of power, whether they're police officers or politicians or whatever it is, when they broke that social contract with people of color, marginalized people, oppressed people, et cetera, by beating on them, killing them, and not having their histories represented in the curriculum, like all these promises and contracts have been broken, right? And so this is a response to that. It's like, you know what? We're done. Like this has to end. And these symbolic statues that uphold this notion of white supremacy, that uphold the status quo, that uphold this incomplete or incorrect Eurocentric narrative has to stop because it's deadly. And it has been deadly for centuries, as we've been sharing. And so people are just fed up with that and wanting to pull them down. And I'm going to share a little bit about what's, in California, we have a lot of missions out here, right? And those missions were established by Father Junipero Serra. And so one of the missions here in the LA area, San Gabriel Mission, was on fire like just a couple of weeks ago. The whole roof was on fire. Nobody knows how it started. It could have been who knows what, maybe it was the ancestors, maybe it was actual people. Nobody knows. But they had just finished with a $200,000 renovation of upkeeping for that mission. And then the next day when they finished, the roof burned off. And so the whole thing just, was destroyed. And up and down the state, statues have been coming down of Junipero Serra. And then at the state capitol in California, they just removed the statue of Columbus and Isabel. They removed that. And when people first approached the capitol about that, they said, there's no way that's ever going to happen. There's no way it will ever be removed. And it was removed, right? Some of the statues have been torn down by the citizens, by people themselves, and others were taken down by the governments, whether they're local governments, state governments, whatever, because people forced them to do that. I was involved in organizing in the city of Ventura, where I'm from, with a group of other local organizers, amazing people. And we organized really well to force the city of Ventura, well, it's actually San Buenaventura, named after the San Buenaventura mission established by Junipero Serra. And in front of City Hall, which is at the top of the hill, is right in front is this 9-foot copper or bronze, I should say, statue of Junipero Serra, larger than life. Right. And so when all of these statues started coming down, us organizers in the community just started putting feelers out to say, who's down to like get the statue down? And people were like, let's do it. And so we organized, the Chumash people, who are the first peoples of the Ventura area, the Ventureño Chumash tribe, they stepped up and they reached out to city council, to the mayor, and to the priest from the mission to start to have conversations about moving the statue. And then we had pro-Serra people start to put pressure on the city council to leave it alone, right? That it's a landmark, it's a historic landmark. And so then the rest of us just kind of picked it up from there and just started organizing and put together an amazing campaign and really make sure that there was a lot of visibility and a lot of education behind this as to who he really was, according to the indigenous people. And calling into city council meetings and organizing that. There's just a lot of work that went behind that. So at the end of the day, the city council finally voted. It was a 6-0 unanimous vote to go ahead and remove the statue. So the statue was actually just removed this past Thursday, like at 4 a.m. They kind of like snuck it in because they didn't want people to know about it, because we had a lot of pro-Sarah people trying to protect it. And what trips me out about the pro-Sarah folks is that I basically see two groups. One group is really pro-white and we need the statue there because it's a mark of our domination over everyone else, right? And don't you dare remove it. And there shouldn't be any statues removed anywhere in the United States. And what's happening is crazy, and we should protect our history. Those type of people. And they are linked to very, very racist people that, they've posted things, really ugly things about the BLM movement, really ugly things about African American people, like using the N-word. I mean, just terrible, ugly things. And then we have the very conservative, part of that are very conservative white Catholics, right? That were just pro-Sarah means pro-Chumash, meaning that he used to protect the indigenous people. And, that's just crazy. But so we have that. And then we also had a number of Mexican Americans who are very Catholic also calling in to protect the statue. So that to me tells me that there's still a lot of miseducation going on, that our people, my people, and particularly out here, are still very much brainwashed and very much mentally colonized, and they have not to this day understood that they are indigenous and that their indigenous ancestors suffered because of the mission system, both in Mexico and here, what is today California. So they don't have an understanding of that. Right? They don't have an understanding of like the people who carried their own DNA in their own blood, what the atrocities that they had to suffer. So they don't have an understanding. To them, it's just like, but he's a saint and this is part of our Catholic, blah, blah, blah. End of the day, we have to think about the separation of church and state too. It's like, we don't need this religious figure right in front of City Hall on public property funded by the tax dollars of the citizens of our city. Like that's crazy. It's against the law to do that. And so we were able to convince them to take down that statue. And again, it's a symbolic, there's power in people taking down the statue themselves, but there's also power in forcing the system to dismantle itself. Forcing the system to recognize that they messed up big time and they have to fix it. Now we have to get onto this journey of restorative justice. What can you do to fix the mistakes of yesterday so that we can all start the healing process and move forward? And it's not just about removing the statue, but now we're on this campaign, right, to like push for the school districts to embed within their curriculum all versions of history so that students can be critical thinkers and come to their own conclusion. So that's how I feel about statues. They need to go.
I want to show you guys to piggyback off of that. We need ethnic studies, man. Can you guys see it?
Yes, that's right. That's right. We need ethnic studies everywhere. Yes, and we do need to hire more Black teachers and more brown teachers. There's a question going around right now, right, where people posted, what grade were you in when you had your first Black teacher or Latinx teacher? And people are like, dang, like, you know what, probably not. Maybe in high school, for sure in college, but, and yeah, the first one I can remember was my Spanish teacher in high school. Like, that's it. Mm-hmm. That's it. So we do need more representation. Representation is super important. Visibility is more important. And so the demographics of the students' bodies in our schools the teacher demographics need to match that, and the administrator demographics need to match that. The only schools that are primarily Black and brown are like the custodial, the cafeteria, the staff, all of the help. Like that's what you see that matches the demographics of Black and brown schools. But they also need to see themselves in the teachers and in the administrators.
So, I wholeheartedly agree with what Veronica was sharing with us about just like, now that these statues are being torn down, right? Like, it's great that we're getting the system to do it, but what's happening, right, at the systematic level within schools, right? What are we doing to help the people understand the narrative that they were misfed and the other narrative, right? There's always, people always say there's always more than one side, right? Just how are we going to get our communities to understand that? And Veronica mentioned some restorative justice, right? Which is a system that is put in place to allow for equitable means of problem solving, right? And doing it in a way that is very mindful to, one's cultural, like upbringings, and, making sure that we're helping our students like inquire about the world around them rather than feed them what they're supposed to be doing. Restorative justice is usually a space like you're in circles, very similar to our indigenous backgrounds. Like if we think of like in Lakesh and like the Maya and the Aztec, like, right, like everything was in circular, and restorative justice usually entails restorative justice circles. So it's like embodying an entire new way of transforming an entire new way the schools are functioning, because schools are functioning not in restorative justice manners. It's like zero tolerance, right? So if we tear down all these statues and we don't change the way that this oppressive system works, what's the point of the statues coming down, right?
There's always this frame between like decolonization and indigenization, and then how they're both separate, and it's like in its manifestation. So for example, decolonization is like breaking down the system that it oppresses, that is being done, that should be done. However, it also doesn't reestablish the indigeneity practices that were initially created. So you may have some restorative justice practice that does all this and that, but it's not based on the indigenous tribe or nation that was focusing on that in the correct space, in the correct mannerism, in the correct strategy. So how can that be balanced in this restorative justice work?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I think that's something that I would honestly have to do more research on, because I actually I recently came across this ideology that you just mentioned. Like, how come restorative justice is not it's not like affirming where this ideology truly comes from? So how valid is it? I think as educators, it's our responsibility to do that work and to find out how can we make this practice as meaningful and in the most respective way to its origins. And I think I'm really curious to learn what you have to say about this, because I'm a fan of restorative justice circles, but I hear what you share, and I think that it needs to be addressed.
Yeah. So you're an elementary school teacher. You teach 3rd and 4th grade. You, for my, like, that's the time where people are introduced to Columbus, correct? Mm-hmm. How do you, as an educator, knowing what you know, and knowing the curriculum that's provided, and knowing the administration that you have, if wherever they are at, how do you teach Columbus then? Like, how is Thanksgiving?
I make a PowerPoint that says school's off on Monday. Why? That's what I put. Like, that's the first question. And the kids would share out Columbus Day. And I'm like, and I say, what do we know about Columbus Day? And then I type out everything that they say. Like, everyone who wants to share about what they know, I write it on the board, on the smart board. And then I share with the students what the Columbus, the American side. I share the American, like, that there's like a portrait of like when he arrived, or like, I can show you the PowerPoint later, but there's like a special portrait that I think you know which one I'm referring to, when the Europeans arrived and they're
like
American. Yes, they're like that. So like, I share that picture, and I share with them how some people celebrate Columbus Day. Then I share with them, and we read. Before I even share that, we read Encounter. Oops, sorry. Then we talk about what it is. Then we read Encounter, and I say this is, and we do the Taino boys perspective, and then I explain to them like with the Eurocentric perspective, and then I say some people are calling it Columbus Day. I show them the map, so they get to look at maps, and they go around and they write what they notice, and they notice like in this states, like they always notice in New York, like Albany has Indigenous people, like a city near Albany has Indigenous People Day, and then like New York City still is Columbus Day. And they notice like, how come it's like, they say, oh my gosh, that's so weird. And then I say, what would you choose? Before I say what would you choose, we look at, because it's like sometimes it's usually a few days.
Yeah.
You know those little visuals that, those optic illusions, they look at an optic illusion, and I say, what do you see? And I show them 2 different optic illusions. The kids get freaked out because they see four different things, and they all find, oh, that was the other thing, that was the other thing. And then I say, a story has 2 sides. So what do you think it should be called? And then my first 2 years, that's all I did. My 3rd and 4th year, I was able to get artifacts and like really great visuals of the islands and his exact voyage, and like a little bit of where he really was, and then different Taino words like huracan, tobacco. It's like this, it's more of a like indigenous focused. So like the last 2 years I did a really indigenous more. They didn't just have the maps of where Columbus Day was celebrated. They got to have the maps about the Tainos and who they are. And it talks all about, like, it was the brochure from the museum, so it talks all about it in English and Spanish. And so I do the same PowerPoint, but then when we get to the map part, they get to explore and learn the new words of the Tainos. And we go to I was able to take them to the exhibit, but now the exhibit, it wasn't a permanent exhibit. So I only got to go 3 times, which was 2 years, which was great. And when I went on in Indigenous Peoples Day, my school, we were supposed to actually get the filmmaker that I have to share you with the film. I'll email it to you by tomorrow. Okay. It's a Puerto Rican film that's a cartoon of a little Taino girl and her grandmother after Hurricane Maria being together, and she learns the story of the Tainos and what of the indigenous people and what happened when Christopher Columbus came, and it's like a kid's version of it. And we were actually supposed to have it at our school at the end of the year because I saw it this Indigenous Peoples Day at Smithsonian, and it's a Puerto Rican woman. So we were supposed to actually have that for all our students this year, and it's in Spanish, and then it's subtitles in English. So we were really excited for that because it's just, the kids are so used to always seeing English subtitles Spanish. So yeah, like I do a lot for that day. Like, and we do the big posters, and the kids they write at the end what they think. They write, they think if state should change it, they put their opinion. Should New York City and New York State change it to Indigenous Peoples Day? Some kids say Columbus Day. Some kids say no. Some kids say I think both, keep both. So I get their narrative and just how they feel about it, and then, you know, I just leave it at that. I think if they were like, I'm going to have 5th grade next year, I think I want to do a debate.
But have you ever had them with the pilgrims and the teep and the hat, the arrows? Do you ever, because I looked at me and my brother and how we went to elementary school and how we celebrated Thanksgiving. That was we actually had to wear the stuff. And I look back like, damn, man, you didn't know better, did you?
Exactly. No, I'm pretty hardcore because we watch we watch Democracy Now! Videos about Indigenous Peoples Day protests, and we watch the real. So we do watch a real. I can send you all these clips too, like all my resources. We watch the really water washed, the whitewashed version that we were taught with the Pilgrims and the Santa Maria, and we watch like a 3-minute clip and it sounds like it's on TV. You know, it's like probably like from the 90s or something. You know, it's old cartoon. So the kids are like, okay, they're used to that narrative. And then we watch the real history of Thanksgiving, which is, there's a part that because my 4th and 5th graders, my students always stay in the classroom and watch it, but I give them a warning. I say they show like some, you know, like slavery, the indigenous people were enslaved. And I tell them there's a picture and I let the parents know, and the kids make the decision to like close their eyes or go in the other room, go into the hallway until like they have to count to 60 and then come back because there's like that picture. But most of the kids, they're ready to watch it because they're playing Fortnite, you know, come on. But they're like, I can't handle it. But I show them, and it's my admin where I'm at now is real, like all about social justice. I'm very fortunate where I'm at. I know that not every teacher has all this freedom to do this. And then we watch like the Democracy Now! Protests. And that's like after we've learned all about, after we kind of had like after we shared what we know about Columbus Day. Because in my first school that I taught at 2 years, the kids' narratives, some kids knew that like they were Dominican or Puerto Rican, and they knew that he was a murderer. But like my Central American kids, they were like, some of them were like, he's a bad guy. Like I could tell, like they might have had teachers that taught them, but some of them were like, but my mom and dad said that he's, you know, he did this. Like they had like mixed feelings. And then in my current school, you could tell that the social justice teaching was like boom, because the majority, they were like, he was not a good person. But some of my kids are Italian, so they were like, but I'm Italian American, so, but it wasn't good what he did at all. It wasn't good at, you know, and they're 8, they're 9, so they're like, it's funny because I had such a different experience as a kid learning about it, and then just seeing the 2 different schools that I'm teaching at. Like my former school was all Latino too. That was the difference. And now where I'm at is kind of gentrified. Yeah. So just experiencing I was so used to also teaching it like this is what happened to us, and this year was the first year that I had so many white, like I had not so many white students, a lot of them were half white and half like another ethnic, but more white students than I ever had. And I taught it like as diplomatically as I could, and and they were really open to it, and I want them to make their decision on their own, you know.
Because the second I could do these things, I did, and I was like through these video viral learning. So
yeah,
we were talking about like parabolas, and so we're talking about economics. We're talking about owning your own businesses. We're talking about Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, and relating what happens when you own your own business. And that was even in Brooklyn. If you own your own business in Brooklyn, this is the way you can navigate. And so it was really cool on that lens as well.
That's so needed because, you know, I said it before, it's like, we can't, you know, and I was saying like, we can't have our own cooperative economics. I shouldn't say that, right? We can. It's just like, historically, it's been taken away, and we have to keep trying again and again. It's like, why can't our curriculum just be in this way? Like, why can't you always teach parabolas this way, right? Like, you know, how can we create, you know, this system that is consistently connected to help one another and to continue it and keep our money within the same space to uplift each other. So it's like, it's so foreign when you first think it. first think about it, right? And it's exciting to know that that's the great thing about you being at the high school or middle school. You said high school, right? High school level region. So yeah, like it's like we have to be in, as the activist educators, we have to be at every part of the spectrum, right? And have like a scope and sequence to help each other out too, because there's a lot on our plates
like,
already to teach.
At a percentage.
And I want us to be able to connect it all.
With that said, that is all the time that we have. Thank you everyone for joining us. Now for everyone at home, make sure you like the video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on our... With that said, that is all the time that we have. Thank you both for joining us. For everyone at home, make sure you like the video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on all our social media outlets at Latin Entertainment _presents. That is Latin Entertainment _presents. Also, you can listen to us on our various podcast platforms that vary from Anchor, Spotify, Apple Music, and Google Podcasts, just to name a few. Lastly, our next season 3 early exclusives are going to be on this upcoming US 2020 presidential election, pre and post discussions. So tune in for that coming soon. Thank you all for joining us, and see you next time as Latin Entertainment presents Conversamos.
Yeah, yo, is it that wrong? I'm making a song, I'm taking it back for the platform that I formed. You should chop it and transform. I run the reservoir, the predator, like a hungry carnivore. When I'm breaking through these heavy doors, this is desert storm. A metaphor to show I'm equipped and informed. I'm striking with the mega force, I'm lukewarm, your crew swarms. With the fear, my lyrics do harm. If you ain't lending a hand, I'm breaking your two arms.